Mesai.
Mesai.
Hungarias.
Let's make some TV. Clapping for myself, eh? Okay. Tanse tohtimtek Cheryl Arondel Nitserason. Ahpito ko san square o mania. Nehi o square go Mr. Kosuin o square. Alberta, Misquachi was Gaigan, Egua Papas Jace of Chinia Maga, Saskatoon, Miwachniwegan. So in my language, I introduced myself, and that language is Nipawiwin, Cree language. And I basically told you my name and that I'm a half-breed and that I'm originally from northern Alberta, Papas Chase First Nation, and Mesquachi Waskaigan, which is the city of Edmonton. And it translates to mean the Beaver Hills Lodge. And I live in Saskatoon now, and I'm really happy to be here today to talk about the work that I created for the exhibition Entanglements. So as you can see, we're starting out with a lovely shot of the falls that I can't actually say in French, so I apologize for not being able to make that sound in my mouth, but I love the Anishinaabe word for the falls, which is Akikodjiwan. And we'll talk a little bit about why I named the work, what I named the work. As you can see, it says Nipawiwin Akikodjiwan, Pimizi, ohci. And the title comes from a series of work that I've been making in different locations around the world. And this is very site-specific to this place. So Nipawiwin means the act of standing up. And Akikodjiwan in the Anishinaabemowin language is a PipeBowl. And Pimizi is also in the Anishinaabemowin language, and it's the word for eel. And ohci is a word in my language, and it means for, with, or because of. So for me, the whole notion of Nipawiwin, of making a series of work, is a way of sort of, as a political action of standing up. You can also sit in, right? And you can also stand in. So there's all these different ways that we can frame our sort of participation and how we're going to be part of the work, part of maybe the issues or the problems that the work is trying to deal with. And so that was why I titled the work. It's this hope that in standing in the installation, in understanding even today what the work is about, you're actually you're part of a sit-in, in protest, in support, right? And I think I want to come back to, and hopefully I will remember to come back to, the Anishinaabemowin word of the falls, because I think there's something poetic and beautiful that I started to realize in the making of the work. And I think it's also important to say that in my language, we don't have a word for eel. So it's important that that I use the language of this place to describe the work, in part. When I first was contacted by Selena and Ryan to create a work for the exhibition, I first talked about an older piece that I had created in 2016 for an exhibition in Australia called With Secrecy and Dispatch. And that exhibition was an international exhibition dealing with the massacre of the Dharawal people just outside of Sydney, and who were massacred and had their population decimated, actually driven off of a cliff so that farmers could have farm land in that area. And so for that work, I used technology. You can kind of see in the center there's a little tiny light on the ground. That's actually a Kinect camera. That's, you just see it right there. A Kinect camera that's connected to a computer and using JavaScript and processing. What it did was essentially you would walk into the room and there was like a 9-foot by 12-foot projection of a video of just a location. And as you walked into the space, very much with lighting and kind of tape so you knew where to stand, the Connect camera would be taking an image of you every split second and compiling them so that it would become opaque. And there was also a monitor on the ground that you'd read what that plaque said, that you could not really read from where you were standing, but if you looked down at the monitor, you could read what the plaque said, and you'd understand that, oh, it's the plaque that was to homage, to apologize for the massacre. And then by the time you looked up, you realized that you were actually standing behind the monument, and you'd become part of the video. And I really wanted to use that technology again for this exhibition when we were talking about entanglements. Because most of my work really is looking at, Indigenous issues, and has been for decades as an Indigenous artist. That's my MO. And so that was my first proposal to make the work and to reuse this technology. That wasn't without its bugs, but it really worked elegantly, And the great thing about it too is that as you walked away, then each one of those little snapshots would start to be deleted, and eventually would be back to. So it wasn't permanent; it was just very temporal. You were there, And what I was trying to say with that work is that not a lot of people go to that site anymore, and let's have you be participatory part of this protest, of this standing up for the Dharawal people, standing up to apologize. And what I was proposing originally to even further this was my experience of being in Ottawa, as many of your colleagues and friends who come to Ottawa might be to sit on a Canada Council jury, and that might be the only time we come, or it might be to come to a conference. Or if we're in an exhibition, we might travel here, but not living here. My history, my knowledge of Ottawa really is limited to protests. And so I was speaking with Selena and Ryan initially about the protest, which was Chief Theresa Spence and the hunger strike that she did during the whole Idle No More period, about the living conditions at Attawapaskat. And so this is an image of the camp on Christian Island, and that was the location I was wanting to work with, was on the river there, Kichi Sipi, which is the Anishinaabe word for the river. And I would use the same technology. As you can see here, she's visited by Adam. Is it Adam Driver? He's a famous Indian actor. We'll just call him Adam.
Beach.
Adam Beach, thank you very much. So she's here with Adam Beach, and she's inside the teepee that I just showed you. She's inside the teepee with Adam Beach, and now she's inside the teepee with Justin Trudeau and her helpers. You can see around her. And so I would have done the same thing. It would have been basically, walking into a scene where Chief Theresa Spence is sitting, and you walking into the space eventually would be sitting with her, and it would be a way to say that we need to all participate in these events. We all are implicated in these historic events. We all are implicated in these realities of Indigenous people. It doesn't matter where you live. If you have potable water, that's relational to a community that doesn't. We need to realize that. But the most wonderful thing happened as I was continuing this conversation with Ryan and Selena, and this was when Ryan, probably because of your architectural background, started mentioning the dam and the whole dam site and a lot of the politics and the history of the dam being created. And so then the idea started switching to, well, is there a way that we can implicate people in that we're all involved in the creation of this dam, whether you protest it or not? I mean, the fact that we're using electricity today, the fact that everything is powered by electricity means we're all implicated in that dam site, And I don't mean that dam site, that dam site, although both work. And so that was another sort of thing, well, can we get some video so that we're actually realizing that we all have the hard hats on, that we actually are all the builders of the necessity of this dam. And that's still something I think that, is, in my mind, a problem that I've yet to solve in the work. So that was then the next sort of preponderance, until Ryan mentioned eel ladders. And he mentioned that in the creation of the dam that they had built some eel ladders. And there was also even a camera that was videoing the eels. And I'm from northern Alberta, and we have no direct access to the ocean. So we have lingcods, we have suckers, we have all kinds of like long fish, but there's no freshwater eels in northern Saskatchewan or northern Alberta. And so this freshwater eel issue became it was a story I wanted to hear. And really, that then became the story for me, that it's like a cliffhanger. Who are these eels? How are they here and not where I live? How are they, what's their story? And why would somebody be building them eel ladders? Why do they need eel ladders? And why are there cameras aimed at them? I mean, so it just became a really intriguing story that I wanted to know more about. And because a lot of my work really is around the notion of language, Indigenous language, my language specifically, I started asking around, actually. I started asking people, from my community and from Treaty 6, where I'm from, I started saying, how do you say eel in our language? And, people were starting to make up long words, because I would describe what a freshwater eel was, and so I'd get these long descriptions. But it wasn't a historic term, a functional term, a usable term. It was we'll describe what you're describing in Cree. So serendipitously at this time, I was invited to sing at a Interspecies communication symposium that was organized by M.J. Barrett at the University of Saskatchewan. Because I had written a song for one of my cousins, Shane Belcourt. I had written a song where I actually, and this is part of my practice as a singer-songwriter, is I actually listen to nature, and I listen to birds, I listen to even trees hitting other tree branches, and from that I can start to hear melodies, phrases, rhythms, and I compose songs that way. And so I had composed a song where I was listening to birds, and I was also listening to plants, because I had read Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, and in the book she says, the plants have their own stories, and they have their own songs. And for me, that was, I was kind of gobsmacked when I read that. So singing at this interspecies communication symposium was quite an amazing moment for me. It was online, but there was this incredible feeling like all the people that were attending were all these interspecies communicators. And it was this amazing kind of attunement, like you could just feel everyone was listening to everything, and then they were listening to what couldn't be heard as well. They were listening to everything. And I have to say, I was really, really moved after having been a part of that. And this was all during this time of what are eel ladders, and why do eels have cameras on them, and who are these eels, and and realizing that the story was becoming focused on these beings. So I made contact with one of the interspecies communicators. Her name is Gail Simmons, and she agreed that she would communicate with the eels on my behalf. And so it became a lovely process of I asked 5 questions, and then she got from the eels what they had to say about it. And it was a wonderful document that I won't share here. Gail and I are actually going to speak about it next spring, and I can make that available to people. And we're going to speak as part of this interspecies communication symposium. And we'll share what verbatim what the eels had to say through her. But one of the things was I asked the eels, I said, how do you want to be depicted? I said, I have photos of you as a female, and this is a mature female who's now starting to make her way down the river back out to the Sargasso Sea, which is the only place on the planet where freshwater eels mate in their very interesting and peculiar way. I said, I have you as an adult female. I said, I have you as there's different, they grade them by color, so there's brown eels and green eels. I said, I have baby eels. And the eels said, through Gail, they said, humans love babies. So show them our babies, because maybe there will be sort of, I'm paraphrasing and adding words to what the eels had to say, but my sense was they were saying, maybe there will be some compassion. Maybe the eels, or maybe humans will actually take a bit more interest in us if they see our babies. Can we move to the next slide? I think So this is a glass eel. And so, because it's being held in someone's hand, you get the sense of how small this glass eel is. So it's quite an amazing story, the eels. They actually, the female eels go to the Great Sargasso Sea, and from the time they leave where they're living upstream, and this is kind of interesting, the females actually, their sex they become the sex they are by how far upstream they go. So the women tend to be the ones who go the farthest up inland, and the males tend to stay more in the lowland estuaries. And as the females start to come back, they grow to, their skin gets like several times thicker than it is during their normal lifetime as they're making their way down. And then as they make their way to the Sargasso Sea, as they're continuing to eat, particles and things, they're bottom feeders, they clean our rivers, right? Their eyes actually get 6 times bigger than it would have been in their lifetime. And they need that because they need to swim down into the Great Sargasso Sea where they deposit their eggs. And the male eels also similarly make their journey and they deposit their sperm, and it's kind of thought to be this orgiastic dance that happens. And these baby eels are created. And then the eels have to make their way back up river again. And so this is a video from a British video maker. I've got it on YouTube. And this is just showing, eels, what little glass eels look like as they're making their way back up waterfalls and rock faces to make their way up further and further and further upstream. And so the eels also wanted this, they wanted us to know that they're in peril. The scientists, scientifically speaking, are saying that the eel population is down by 98% in many places around the world. So that means they're on the very precipice of becoming, this mass extinction. And if you look at this footage and you can see how many eels there are sort of making their way up, that would be a fraction of what there would have been in times past. And eels have been discussed for thousands and thousands of years. The Egyptians thought that eels actually were created in the mud of the Nile. And Pliny the Elder thought that the skin, as it rubbed across the rocks, is what created new eels. And Aristotle, would ponder about how did eels, know how to go back to their place of origin, knowing that, they all mate in one place and they all go back to their place of origin. So it's been something for thousands of years that people have been sort of wondering about these eels. And I spoke with an Indigenous, a Maori woman, and she was telling me that in her, where she's from, when she would visit her aunties in remote places, there was this pond, and when they had to fetch water, her aunties would tell her to take a pail and then go to that water and just sort of slap on the top of the water, do that for a minute, and then put the pail in, because that pond was one of the cleanest ponds, where they always knew that the water was crystal clear, and it was because the eels lived there. And the eels would, clean anything on the bottom. And by slapping on the water, the eels would move out of the way so you could put your pail in. And that way you'd never take an eel. You'd let them do their work. So at any rate, that might have been going down a rabbit hole. Maybe you need to edit that. Or maybe it's important to say that I also asked the eels how they wanted to be acknowledged. And the eels, I asked them, I said, do you want me to say Pimizi, which is the Anishinaabemowin word for eel? And very cleverly they said, why don't you look and see how many human languages have a word for us? And in even languages and within languages. And I thought that was really interesting that they said that, because I didn't tell them or the interspecies communicator, but I'm working on a PhD and I'm looking at actually small sound shapes like morphemes and phonemes in 2 languages, and in relationship to land. And so I thought it was very interesting that they said languages within languages, and I went, oh, okay, they're speaking to me. So I did some initial research, and not exhaustive by any means, but I found 140 different languages that have unique words for eel. And so the soundscape that's in the exhibition is by Nick Schofield, and he contributed, or I commissioned him to create the sound design. And it was really wonderful. When you go into the gallery, you'll hear some of the sounds actually almost sound like they're underwater, and some of the sounds are more present in the room. And I have to say that I was really delighted that all of the indigenous languages that are part of the sound design, they're actually old people speaking, as opposed to all of the other languages. It's AI, so it's artificial intelligence has produced the sound. So there's an interesting interplay going on there. But let's see. I worked with also then to help depict this for the exhibition. This is just a quick still, but you'll see it actually moving in the exhibition. I worked with a team at the epicenter at the University of New South Wales, and they worked in unity to create a wall. There's that full wall in the gallery of the eels, and along the bottom kind of is the words that go past. And what's interesting is being in the space, what I've realized is that it's also, because of its projection mapping, there's almost times when you can't actually get close enough to the eels. So it's almost intentional in ways, or maybe it's kind of like a serendipitous happening where it's like, that's the state we're at right now. The eel population is in such decline that we actually can't get that close to them anymore. So it is still a conundrum. How do we keep in touch with them? How do we care for them? How do we ensure that they continue to climb up the rocks at Chaudiere Falls? Chaudiere, I tried to say it. Is that it? Pretty close? Okay. Or Akikodjiwan. And the one thing I want to say about just going back to that notion of Akikodjiwan is that a pipe bowl, would be used for ceremony. And one thing that from my teachings that I've been taught is that when we smudge, or when we pray with tobacco or sage or any of those medicines, it's actually the smoke that rises up and actually is the food of our ancestors. And so that's why when we're praying, we're actually feeding our ancestors. And I thought there's something really beautiful and poetic about the fact that the falls were called PipeBowl. And you've got these little glass eels that are making their way up the cliff faces. And I thought, for me, that's kind of like poetry in motion. There's an integral togetherness, and that needs to continue to happen. That we need to continue to have those little eels ascending upwards, at this place that would be sacred to the Anishinaabe people. So I've spoken for a few extra minutes, but I just wanted to acknowledge that I received some funding for this project that helped me to enlist the participation and expertise of Sami Arsentalis, who did the projection mapping and video editing, Howard Adler, who actually shot the images of the falls, which we'll show you after the next slide, Nick Schofield, who did the sound design, and then Conan Burke and Rob Lothar, who did the Unity programming at the University of New South Wales Epicenter. So, Kinena Skumpton, I hope I said enough that was cogent and interesting, and I really would love to speak with you about the eels. Before I finish, and maybe the next slide there, so this is one of Howard's shots. When I asked the eels how I could repay them, because I paid for all the people who contributed to the work, and the eels said, do something, take a risk, do something out of your scope. And so that is the big challenge for me now. How do I continue to speak on, not on behalf of, but how do I continue to sort of speak and let people know the story of the eels and the sort of really precarious critical state that they're at. So, that means that's all for now.